we thought it would be a good idea to go over the rules, recap a little bit on what these rules mean for non-residents selling services into Colombia, as well as going through the mechanics around registering for VAT, remitting VAT, charging VAT, interaction with customers here, et cetera, et cetera. Colombia has taken the lead somehow in the region with a few other countries in terms of introducing rules for VAT for non-residents, following Action 1 of BEPS. And then today, the plan we have is to go through the original rules that were enacted a few years back, and also, as well as with VAT rules, we will comment on the interaction with income tax and certain other matters that we think are important. Um, Today, key speaker is going to be our colleague Isabella Bello. Uh, on the screen now, you can see Isabella's picture, position, and email address, and then I will be joining Isabella from time to time as we go through the presentation to comment on practical matters around VAT registration for non-residents. Mm, I think it's also good to mention to anybody in attendance that these rules, which we're going to comment on today, um, are in a way fully operational. Uh, there are public records. The tax office from time to time releases records with the number of foreign companies, non-resident companies are already registered for VAT in Colombia that are really here registered for VAT, charging, filing for VAT, remitting the tax, etc., to the tax office from time to time. So these rules are really, really on the table now, and certainly over the past 2 3 years, uh, there has been a lot of action in terms of understanding the mechanics, addressing issues, etc., etc., as far as these rules are concerned. So, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Isabella. We plan to run for like 40 minutes in the presentation. We're going to be doing the presentation in English as we discuss the rules. And we certainly expect that we'll have some time in the end for questions. Happy to take any questions. This session is for yourselves. Please feel free to raise your question to the chat. That Daniel and Miguel will help us know when we have a question to answer. We'll try to answer any questions you may have. So welcome again. It's now 9:10 in the morning in Colombia. And Isabella, over to you so we can start.
So, as Carlos Miguel was mentioned, Colombia has implemented Action 1 of BEPS. From a Colombian perspective, the importation of services has been under the radar since 1990. 1990, we actually established an importation rule for services, but they was limited only for insurance. And then through the past years, we have implemented several rules having or introducing more services to the importation of VAT rules until law or the tax reform of 2016. Under such reform, basically what we do is that we all of the services that are rendered into or inside Colombia, no matter if they're digital or non-digital, under the scope of VAT. Of course, there are some services that under local legislation are considered as zero rated or exempted, zero rated, let's say, exportation of services. And for exempted services, basically, we want to highlight from a digital perspective cloud computing and hosting services. We will go deeply under these concepts um, through the presentation. So since 2017, once the tax reform, the law 1819 came in force, all of the services that are provided from outside Colombia that are used or consumed in Colombia are to be considered VATable unless there is a specific exemption on the law. The law says that it is considered that a services was or is consumed or used in Colombia when the beneficiary of the services is actually a user that has his tax process in Colombia, is a tax resident, has a permanent establishment, or has been domiciled under the Colombian territory. However, through a recent ruling, actually it was issued this year, the tax office has established that it is not just to be considered the residence or the location of the service recipient, but rather that actually that service is being used in the Colombian territory. So we just not need to look whether it's a Colombian customer, but rather if that service is actually being consumed in the Colombian territory, or if regardless that, it is actually being consumed outside Colombia. So that means, for example, that if we're talking about, let's say, a restaurant services that it's provided outside Colombia or a hotel services that it's provided outside Colombia, regardless that the fact that the consumer of that service is a resident, that will not be considered under VAT. So this is actually very important because sometimes that line between what is considered consumed outside Colombia and what is considered to be used or consumed within Colombia a little bit black, not so black and white, and it to actually analyze that in order to establish whether our services are VATable or not. Forward, the VAT rules are basically divided on B2B and B2C. However, can move to the next slide, please. However, when we're talking about B2B or B2C, it's not actually the fact that it's an individual or a legal entity, but rather whether it is a VAT responsible individual or not. Sometimes there can be entities that are registered in Colombia but that are not considered as VAT responsible. And the reason is basically because they only provide exempt services or non-VATable services. Also, there may be cases in which some individuals can be considered as VAT responsible. So when we're doing this analysis, we should not look to whether it is a B2B transaction or a B2C, but rather whether under such transaction we're talking about VAT responsible agents or not. How we can find this information? Well, this information needs to be asked to each of our customers, and the proof of whether I am or not a VAT responsible will be found on the tax registry, which is called in Spanish RUT, and that document can only be downloaded by its owner. So we cannot check the tax status of any other entity to ask them to provide such information.
Isabella, to your point, I think it's very important for those of you not familiar with the Colombian tax system. Certainly, this is a challenge, how to understand if the customer down here in Colombia is registered for VAT or otherwise. And what the practice dictates is that you should ask for the tax registration form. Isabella's point is very, very critical. This registration form locally is known as RUT, R-U-T. So anybody familiar with the Colombian tax practices will understand here what RUT means. And then on the RUT form, you'll see if there is a VAT box checked. If so, then you as a non-resident, you do nothing as far as that customer is concerned, because then the customer will self-charge the VAT. However, it may be that you sell to customers that are registered for VAT, and you get the enrollment form, and you get comfort on that. But at the same time, you also have some other customers on a B2C context space, like individuals, and then you have, like, both circumstances happening to you at the same time. So very important to think about enrollment, how to make sure you check on the VAT category of your customers in Colombia. The way to get that confirmed is the RUT. Thank you, Isabella, for giving me the chance to elaborate on.
Yes, so once we have that information of the VAT status of our customers, we will know whether VAT is going to be collected through a reverse charge mechanism, in which case we will have to do nothing. All the VAT will be in charge of the Colombian entity. There's no registration requirement for the non-resident service provider. Or if we're talking about a transaction with a customer that is not considered agent in Colombia, that's likely to be individuals. However, as I mentioned, there are some individuals that may be VAT responsible. And this mechanism or situation for VAT, it's applicable as per the law since July 2018. As you remember, we mentioned that service importation rules for VAT, or from a generical perspective, were introduced in the tax reform of 2016, in force since 2017. And such reform establishes that for non-resident service providers, they will be obligated to collect remit the B2C transactions since July 2018. However, the tax office did not provide any regulation on how to register, how to collect, how to remit VAT until January 2019. So that gives us a 6-month period in which there's no certainty on whether we will need to collect or not the VAT. Rules were provided in January 2019, and they actually established how to register. They established a special form for non-resident service providers, and they also establishes a way to pay from outside, either in a Colombian bank account or in a bank account in the United States. The law also provides an alternative system for withholding tax, which is based on credit or debit card situation financial institutions. However, this alternative system is not yet in place. It was supposed to be in place since 2020. Regulations are all in place, but we are missing one critical point, and is that the tax office is required to issue a list in which they will establish which are the non-resident service providers that are going to be applicable to this alternative system. Currently, there's no list, there's no draft of list, and as far as we know, the tax office is not actually moving forward in this way. Daniel, maybe. So the B2C compliance systems, as we mentioned, this alternative system from the financial institution is not in place. It requires that if we want to get into these systems, basically the services that we will need to provide has to be all variable. We cannot provide variable and exempted services at the same time. So that means that if a non-resident service provider, for example, has a cloud computing services and a variable services and streaming services, for example, at the same time, that non-resident service provider will not be entitled to enter an alternative system. So if we want to ask to be included in such a list, we basically need to know that all of our services are variable and that we're basically talking only about digital services. That's the two requirements that the law establishes if I want to enter into this alternative system. However, as I mentioned, this system is not currently placed. We're still missing the tax office list for the non-resident service provider, and until such list is not released by the tax authority, that means that the non-resident service provider needs to go through the self system in which they will need to register, collect, and remit, as we will see in next slide.
Isabella, if I may, to your point, I think what this really means is Colombia so far has chosen the registration approach, if you will, instead of putting the banking system here into motion, so that everybody paying with credit cards or similar payment methods. The VAT on these services can be remitted by the banks, collected and remitted by the banks. In addition to the list that you say we're missing, we also heard at some point that the tax office and the banks here were not fully getting anywhere in terms of setting this up. Because if you think about it, to be for a bank here in Colombia to be able to charge VAT on to a customer like any of us, and then identify customers, charge the VAT, collect it, and remit it to the tax office. That takes a setup. That takes a setup on the system, etc., and that takes money and effort. And then at some point in time, the tax office moved forward to ask the banks to set that up. The banks pushed back that they didn't have, all the means and resources to make that work. So I don't think we will see soon any changes there. And as a result, the way today for a non-resident selling services into Colombia, which are taxable, to meet this rule is to register, charge, collect, and file for VAT, as we continue to see through the presentation. Thank you, Isabella.
So, as there's no way to go through this alternative system, as you mentioned, the only way that we can be in compliance with the VAT is through a self-registration. To do this self-registration, basically what we need is the certificate of good standing of the entity. This certificate needs to fulfill some requirements, and if we have found that sometimes the certificate of good standing of a foreign country is not what we are expecting of a certificate of good standing in Colombia. So in that case, we want to look forward which additional documents we will to provide to the tax office. Let's say, for example, the list of board directors or any other document that we can use in order to fulfill the expectation of the tax office of what is considered from a Colombian perspective as a certificate of standing. Such certificates must be in Spanish. If it is not Spanish, we will need an official translation, and we will need to apostille such documents. We will need the copy of the ID of the legal representative, let's say the passport. When I mean legal representative, that may be a Colombian concept, but that's the director of the and this process for registration is made through an email. So we don't need actually an official appointment. We can anytime, but all the communications before the tax office are in Spanish. So even though there's no need for a proxy to do this registration, and actually the tax office does not look for a proxy in Colombia, basically we will need a point of contact to have a soft communication with the tax office, since all the requirements and all the different emails are going to be only in Spanish. Also, once we get the registration and we are going to start with the compliance, that the web page of the tax office, the systems through which we will need to file our VAT return, are in Spanish. So from a practical point of view, even though the law did not mention the need to have a legal representative proxy in Colombia, the fact is that we will need a point of contact for Spanish purposes in Colombia, so we get a soft communication with the tax office. Once we get the registration, this is what we're going to obtain. This is going to be our VAT registration, and this is the route. This is an example of a route that is a tax registry from Colombian purposes. The tax officer will send this document through email, and basically what we're going to see is that in the red box there's a number which says 46. That number means that we are VAT responsible as a non-resident service provider, and we will not see any other tax liability, any other tax responsibility. This is just a VAT register. Later on, we will go through which are the points between VAT register and corporate income tax, but this is what we should get only for VAT purposes once we do our registration. Once we get our registration for VAT purposes, we will get also a tax ID, and the legal representative or the director, which can be a non-resident, will also get a tax ID and a password. That password will be the way through which we are going to enter into the VAT system or the tax office system to file our VAT returns. VAT returns are filed on an electronically form. We don't need to file any paper form, or it's made electronically. This is going to be the form or the special form for VAT for non-resident service provider. It is a simplified form for VAT. Basically, it just have compatible transactions, whether we have a annual transactions, and that's all. Whether we have penalties or interest, that's all. As you may see, this form does not allow the non-resident service provider to credit input VAT. So from a practical perspective, this special form does not allow any non-resident services to actually credit any input VAT that it may get from Colombian providers. However, this matter has been asked to the tax office, and through a specific ruling, the tax office has said that there's no limitation in the law for non-resident service providers to use input VAT as a credit. So that means that even though from a practical perspective, the special form does not allow to credit such VAT, we should look for any additional ways to try to get that credit of the input VAT. This is not an easy situation, because when you go to the system, you will find only this special form, not the common or regular form. Something that in case that your company has any input from a Colombian perspective, it may into deeper to see how to recover such input VAT.
Isabella, a couple of comments here for everyone's benefit. You'll see on the screen the filing frequency for VAT here for non-residents is every 2 months, and no extensions in Colombia. So filing due dates are a must, and late filing penalties apply right away the next day. And also the way this form is prepared, you'll see it's in Spanish. It gives you a 2-column model for USD reporting and local currency reporting, etc. We've seen over the years that in terms of getting the data into the return, what happens is that clients need to have a very good coordination between invoicing and the tax groups and ourselves whenever we do the returns, to make sure we capture or the return captures the all the transactions happening within the 2-month window. We are not aware of any in-depth audits on VAT returns like this, which are very, very specific, very special. We'll let you know in a minute where we have seen some action by the tax office. But so far, the mechanics around doing the tax return, as Isabella was saying, are pretty straightforward. Just capture the data from your system timely. And report the USD value at the conversion rate of the filing date and the COP value. That's pretty much it. Whenever you have or you come across the need, you have input VAT incurred in Colombia, and you don't want to lose that money, right? Then there is another way Isabella was mentioning. I'm not going to duplicate the comment here, but there is a way, and it is agreeable by the tax office as well. So it's something already worked up. Thank you, Isabella. Yeah, well, let me keep going here, Isabella. You'll see on the screen practical issues, and we just commented on the input VAT creditability. There is a way to claim input VAT credits if you have any. Next, FX volatility. What has happened really in the past and continues to happen is that non-residents are permitted to make the VAT payment, or the VAT liability can be remitted to a bank account outside Colombia. The Colombian government set that bank account outside Colombia to facilitate payment in USD. So that's the good news. The downside to it was, and continues to be, you file the VAT return, say today, and you put the COP, the local currency numbers, $2 based on today's rate, and that's how you file it, right? Then your treasury colleagues in the organization will process payment tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the next day. It won't happen the same day. And then as they process payment, then dollars, the same dollar amount that is on the tax return, gets to the Colombian tax government or the Colombian tax office's bank account. Then the system, the Colombian tax office's systems, converts the US dollars as receipt to Colombian currency on the date of receipt. So there may be then differences. You may have shown on the tax return that the dollars are worth X amount of pesos, but then one day, 2 days later, as you make the payment, the dollars remain the same. It's the pesos that change because of the exchange fluctuation. Then here, as the payment is converted to pesos, then there is a different amount. And we've seen companies that get letters from the tax office saying, for the past VAT period, you have an overpayment, like you paid more than you had to, or you have an underpayment whenever the currency fluctuation works the other way around. This is very important to manage and to address, because for one matter, um, we believe this is purely FX volatility. Doesn't mean you haven't paid on time your VAT liability, or depending on the circumstances, you have underpaid. Underpayment here, when you file the VAT return and you say you owe $10 of VAT, and the $10 is 4,000 pesos, you are supposed to pay 4,000 pesos. If you don't pay in full, then you're treated as never having filed the return. Then late filing penalties will come to you. However, in these specific circumstances, we've seen that the tax office acknowledges this is FX volatility, and they haven't really penalized anybody, as far as we know, on the grounds that payment was the tax was underpaid, etc., etc. They are just reporting to VAT filers, you may have overpaid, you may have underpaid. At least in one of these circumstances, the numbers were significant, and that would give a lot of headache to anybody of the organization. And then in the end, they decided to pay in pesos. They had a way to make the payment in pesos, bring the dollars to Colombia, and remit pesos to the tax office. That put the whole problem to rest. Not the case for many, that they keep paying in US dollars outside Colombia is the easiest way. And then I think that the advice we can share here with everybody is, to the extent you get those letters, they do not mean you are in default or in non-compliance. It means that you need to address the underpayment or overpayment by reaching out to the tax office and trying to to bring together the numbers, see what the net amount is. If you have an overpayment, in the end, you should be asking for that money. It's refundable upon request, and there's a process for that. So be on alert on those letters as you receive them from the tax office. And then invoicing, Colombia is fully into invoicing, but these rules have not been really required from non-residents. The invoicing rules as we know them for local businesses. So no requirements there so far. However, as a non-resident, you need to produce at least a whatever your form of invoice is under your laws of jurisdiction, and make sure you identify or you break down the VAT you're charging to your customer here. Other than that, no specific requirements, no additional registration or invoicing rules for you to think about. Your customers here, in many circumstances, will need to also self-issue an invoice for the services you receive. So invoicing is like invoicing, sorry, is like pretty straightforward. The most the issues we've seen pretty much relate to the use of currency and conversion to pesos. That's when you start to dealing with the tax office from time to time. Isabella, you want me to cover this one, or you want to take care of it?
As you wish.
Was that? Okay, thank you. Um, Potential and desired withholding tax. For marketplaces, uh, when sellers come and put items for sale and the marketplaces invoices customers and collects on behalf of the seller, um, there is a situation here that for local sales that are paid on credit card or debit card here in Colombia, banks processing the payment, the local banks processing the payments, they do not see a, a seller of record behind. They just do see the marketplace here, a registered marketplace here. And then as they process the payment, they withhold tax. This results in uh, overpayment of withhold tax or withholding taxes on transactions that shouldn't be really taxed. Because in my example, I'm talking about seller of record in Costa Rica is putting an item for sale in the Colombian marketplace of an organization, and then me, Carlos, I'm paying, I'm buying using my local credit card in Colombia. My bank will process the transaction. The bank sees me as a customer and sees the local marketplace as the seller. This is why withholding tax is going to be deducted and remitted. However, the owner of the transaction is in Costa Rica shouldn't have withholding tax. So this is happening. And then to the extent you're already operating or through a local marketplace, or you're thinking about doing that, then you need to revisit this matter and structure the model differently, so you mitigate the risk for withholding taxes, which are pretty difficult to recover, by the way. Um, and then central bank, whenever the other way around, I'm using the marketplace to buy. Again, the seller of record is in Costa Rica. For me, Carlos is an import into Colombia of an item. I am supposed to remit payment myself directly to the Costa Rican seller of record, not through the marketplace, not through the marketplace. So that's a central bank challenge we've seen already, and it's certainly something to address from the very beginning, understand how this works, and mitigate exposure by creating alternative flows to pay, so that this exposure can be mitigated. Um, so I think that's pretty much it here. Isabella, I already commented on. Oh no, this is a sorry invoicing. It may be back to my comment on invoicing again today. No issues there. No need for you to worry about Colombian invoicing rules. They don't apply to you. You come out with whatever your invoice is under the laws of your jurisdiction. But it may be that going forward, invoicing requirements are introduced whenever you operate here through a marketplace. They are going to use the marketplace as a fronting uh, mm, a helper, if you will, to process invoices and understand what's going on in the transaction. So not operational yet, but potentially operational on a going forward basis. Thank you, Isabella.
Thank you, Carlos Miguel. I will just add to that e-invoice new rule that we're still waiting guidance from the tax office on how this will be implemented. However, what we have heard from the tax office is that this would not be an obligation from the e-marketplace to actually um, help or put in place a system through which the user needs to e-invoice, but rather just like a data or an available space in the website in which the user, which will still be in the responsible for e-invoice, needs to upload such invoice so the customers can download. But we're expecting that this will not mean any additional responsibility for the e-marketplace. However, we need to still guidance in this matter. Daniel, if go to the next slide, please. So as we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, basically all services, regardless of whether they're digital or non-digital, that are used or consumed in Colombia, provided from outside, are considered as valuable. I think that we missed some important point, and I will mention right now. VAT general tax rate in Colombia is 19%. I think we missed that part. So for you to know that that's the general VAT rate, 19% over gross revenues. However, there are some services that under local legislation are considered as exempted, such as cloud computing and data hosting. From the cloud computing part of view, the tax office and the Ministry of Technology has issued several rulings and several tests in which they are considering what should be understood as cloud computing. Basically, we include software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a services. So that means cloud under all the modalities that we know. In order to claim this exemption, we basically need to do a test. That's a technical test in which we will get to know whether our services is or not considered as a cloud computing. Um, this test does not need to be provided to the tax office. We don't need any prior authorization to be exempted. However, in case of an audit, it is very valuable. And the other part of the services that are exempted, data hosting, basically that means the way to manage information on the website or in a server.
Isabella, me again here commenting a little bit. Cloud computing is a hot topic. It's a hot topic because you are very familiar with what this means. The cloud computing space is very vast, very vast. And we've seen organizations that operate through platforms on the cloud, and they run a business on a cloud basis, or they just buy cloud services from a provider. And here, the reflection I make here is, as you look at these rules from a Colombian perspective, and you operate on a cloud environment, these rules are worth checking, because it may be that depending on the circumstances, you are exempted from VAT. You don't need to charge VAT to anybody in Colombia. Um, and we've seen a number of instances where businesses uh, that are not really meant to be only cloud services, because they use cloud to run, um, they try and push to accommodate to the exemption, and forget about the VAT. Not an easy task. There are tests there to go through. We will happy to discuss offline those tests, how they may apply to you. But it's really a hot topic, the cloud computing space, as vast as it is for accommodating many business circumstances. So thank you, Isabella.
So slide.
Okay, so I think this is an important slide to talk about. What's the interaction between these rules and income tax? It's a fair question because we've been today talking about under what circumstances you need to register for VAT in Colombia as a non-resident, because you're selling into Colombia remotely, or you are actually doing work within Colombia. And then questions come to us, well, what if I register for VAT? Do I get taxed? Do I get exposed to income tax? What are the other tax implications? And then the first thing to comment here is the sourcing principle in Colombia remains unchanged for income tax. So we care about the place of supply. If the place of supply is Colombia, then we care about income tax. If the services are provided remotely, then we don't care. Then we don't care so far, and we just look at our sourcing principle, which is very simple. And you may have seen the same principle anywhere else in the world. That's the first bullet on the screen. You go to the bottom, and then we are giving some additional content on services provided in Colombia and technical services, technical assistance, consulting services. They get taxed regardless of the place of supply. So by exception, Colombia taxes income tax reaches certain services which are supplied outside Colombia for the benefit of Colombian customers. That's an exception that is very, very broad when it comes to technology-based services. So back to the digital services that we have spoken about today. The place of supply matters. And if you are selling digital services into Colombia remotely, you don't have a presence here. You're doing this remotely. Then the tax office has over the years agreed that if this digital service operate on an automated basis, like you can go and use, receive, and take the benefit of the service without talking to anybody on the other side of the transaction. Then automated services really do not create a taxable presence for you in Colombia from an income tax perspective. And yet, you may be registered for VAT, and that's okay. So it may be that you are registered for VAT, you're charging VAT, you are remitting VAT to the Colombian tax office, and yet you have no worries about income tax. That is only a concern whenever your service is not automated and you use technology to provide it. Let me give you an example. Help desk, customer support. You pick up the phone, you go online, talk to somebody, and you get technical support to be able to benefit from the service. That's the type of support that attracts income tax, because you have somebody on the other side helping you. But if you go online and access the platform and get whatever the service you need from the platform, cloud computing, you just run your software through the cloud, software as a service. Nobody is there helping you. Everything works automatically. That is not today treated as a taxable event for income tax purposes. So VAT rules may well leave you in a position that you exist, you are visible here in Colombia for VAT only, and yet income tax is not a concern of yours. And then registration for VAT doesn't mean you have a taxable present. Isabella was making a point before. Caution is needed. As you register and get the root form for yourself, you should only check the box for VAT. That's the only reason why you're coming to register to Colombia. Don't check any other boxes like for income tax, withholding tax, etc., because that may create confusion for the tax office that they expect you to be a tax filer for other obligations. It really you don't have anything else other than the VAT. So, in addition to that, we don't have like a digital permanent establishment rule yet. Uh, so pretty much using the same principles as ever. Uh, and the key to understanding the income tax consequences again is the automated service model that the tax office agrees to. And this is how many of the uh, non-residents selling digital services into Colombia operate today, and this is the reason why they don't have an income tax exposure. Colombia is an OECD member. Colombia is a member of the inclusive in finalizing the rules for the pillar one and pillar two new architecture for tax purposes. We'll see what comes out of that because that will change what we're talking today here. Whatever comes out of that, Colombia will need to consider, digest, and present to Congress here for consideration and passing. We're not going to use the OECD rules on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 just right away without running that through Congress. Our legal system requires Congress has a voice here. And we expect that Colombia, one way or another, will take those rules, Pillar 1 rules, into local legislation in the next couple of years. That's the expectation. And certainly, as that happens, we will need to discuss again, and we will be coming online to show you what that means. But to close on this, VAT registration doesn't mean you have an income tax exposure if you are providing services remotely. I think as we near the end of the session, I'd like to understand from Daniel, everybody, if we have any questions to discuss. Uh, Otherwise, we're going to give you some minutes back of your time this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are, and look forward to having you online again for our next session. Do we have any questions, Daniel, from anybody in the audience?
Yes, Carlos Miguel, we have a question from Juan Restrepo.
Okay. Can you read it for me, please?
Yeah, it says, in case to us, ask to regional tax office for payment in excess fund, it must be followed the traditional process as local refunds?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yes, the mechanics for refunds for payments, I would say documentation requirements are less demanding than in traditional VAT refunds one. In a nutshell, real quick, you just need to demonstrate that you made the overpayment. You had to pay 100, you ended up paying 120, and prepare the form, the refund form, and some other documentation. But the system is pretty much the same. The government has like 50 working days to process, and generally those refunds are approved, are less demanding in terms of documentation requirements.
Okay, we have another question from
On cloud computing?
Emilia. It's about the is the exception from cloud computing available from July 2018, or was this enacted from recently?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it goes back to 2017. That was when the exemption was introduced. In the first year, there were a number, or there was a big uncertainty of, will the government tell us what cloud computing means? Will they give us guidance, etc.? They never issued any guidance, but over the years, they have issued rulings. And we're happy to talk offline about what those rulings mean with the test. There is a test they created to self-assess if what we are selling is exempted or otherwise is taxable based on the generally accepted understanding of cloud computing. Any more questions, Daniel, that you can see on the screen?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
now.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. We very much want to end on time. We know you're busy. Thank you, Isabella, for taking the lead in presenting and giving us a fresh update on these rules. You'll see on the screen our contact details. Anybody wishing to speak to us offline in more detail, please feel free to reach out to Isabella or myself. Happy to discuss and help you navigate through these rules. Other than that, have a great rest of the day, and thank you for joining again. Thank you. Gracias, Daniel.